I wish I could say I noticed it right away, but it fooled me at first, just like everybody else. I've always had a tight-knit group of friends. There's 5 of us, and we've always been that stereotypical friend group that's been inseparable since we were young enough to believe there was a fairy that collected your teeth in exchange for quarters, and cooties were a very real concern. In our mid-20s now, obviously, we've all had other friends and acquaintances over the years, but nobody ever infiltrated our inner circle, so to speak. That was true until about a year ago. Luke has always been the most outgoing of our group. His tall, athletic build reflects his constant search for new experiences and adventure, while the blonde hair, blue eyes, and beaming smile enhances his natural charm, allowing him to make new friends everywhere he goes. So it was no surprise when Luke told us he had met this cool new guy at the laundromat and invited him out to the bar with us for that same evening. What was surprising looking back is how easily the new guy fit in and seamlessly integrated into our group. The new guy introduced himself as Isaac, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was an average-looking guy in every way. Brown hair, brown eyes, average height and weight. If you looked up generic human on Google, no doubt his image would have popped up. Despite the unremarkable appearance, Isaac hit it off with everyone. There was never that awkward silence that happens when you're just getting to know someone new and you run out of things to say. He spoke to us as though he'd known us for years. By the end of the night, he was in on private jokes among us, and photos we'd taken to remember the night, and already making plans to get together again. In one night, he did what nobody managed to do for 2 decades. He became one of us. Over the next few months, things were great. Isaac became a routine part of the group just like any of the rest of us. While his friendship with Luke seemed closer than his friendship with anyone else, he still developed a strong relationship with each of us. We'd spend time with him individually or in smaller groups. He was always up to grab lunch or help out when asked. In fact, he even helped me move my stuff when I found a new apartment. Naturally, he was also always present anytime the whole gang could get together. Having a 6th person meant that we now could always divide into teams evenly for friendly competition, and there was always one more person to split the cost of pizza and beer when we'd have a monthly movie night. Movie nights started as a tradition in grade school, and we'd pick a theme and spend all night watching as many movies that fit as possible, until we all passed out. We've kept it going all these years. It was during one of these nights that something started making me uneasy. We were in between movies, and while I was waiting for Jerry to put in the next cringe-inducing B-horror movie, I noticed Isaac and Luke were having a conversation, and Isaac's movements seemed to mirror Luke's. They were sitting opposite each other, but their body position was identical, and when Luke reached for his beer, half a second later, Isaac did the same. Now, this didn't immediately strike me as odd. I thought it was just a funny coincidence and decided to point it out. Maybe I'd tease them a bit. I called out to the 2 of them and explained what I just witnessed and said it was as if Isaac was mimicking Luke. I'll never forget the reaction. They both turned to look at me at the same time, but their faces read 2 very different expressions. Luke had the kind of face a person makes when they've realized you're talking to them and are still processing what it is you've said. Isaac, on the other hand, had a deep frown, seemed almost unnaturally curved, and his eyes somehow seemed empty, while his stare bore into the back of my skull for what felt like forever, as if he was searching for something. Then, as suddenly as the expression came on, it vanished and was replaced by a friendly chuckle in response to Luke's laughter and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. That expression unsettled me for the rest of the evening. Isaac's behavior continued to be a near-perfect reflection of Luke's, but I didn't point it out again. In fact, I tried not to even look at them because every so often, I'd look over, and Isaac would be staring at me, smiling, which no longer felt like the friendly smile I was used to, despite having seen the exact expression on his face hundreds of times before. It was like he wanted something from me, but I couldn't figure out what. The more I thought about it, and thought about that unnatural frown, I wondered if maybe I had offended him in some way, and if I let him know I hadn't meant to be that, he'd quit staring, and the uncomfortable tension between us would dissipate. I resolved that during the next movie break, I'd pull him aside and make my apology. I caught up to him heading out to the kitchen after someone asked him to grab us all a few more beers, and I offered to help. When we were out of earshot of the others, I stopped him and told him I was sorry if I had made him uncomfortable, that I hadn't meant anything by my comment earlier, and that I hoped there were no hard feelings. I was wrong. Apologizing made it worse. It wasn't that he didn't accept the apology, or that he became more upset with me. Rather, he matched my apology with one of his own. Maybe that on its own wouldn't have bothered me so much, but when he gave it, it was like watching back a recording of myself, only with a few words changed. Even the body language was a perfect repetition of my own. When he finished, he just stared at me expectantly, with that incomplete smile. I nodded, gave him a pat on the shoulder, then hurried us back to the others, feeling even more unsettled than before. I don't know what time I fell asleep that night, but I do know it wasn't a restful sleep. I recall tossing and turning all night long. Sometime in the night, I know that I woke up and I had the unnerving feeling that someone was watching me. Maybe it was paranoia, but I would have bet money if I'd had the courage to open my eyes, that unnatural frown and empty eyes would have been staring back at me. Things weren't the same after that. I mean, sure, they appeared normal to anyone on the outside looking in, and Isaac seemed to forget what happened entirely. But I couldn't get that night out of my mind, and I found myself watching Isaac much more closely. I guess you could say I was studying him. As I watched him, I realized that he always imitated whoever he was speaking to. The way their bodies were positioned, the way they put their arms above their head to stretch, their facial expressions. Every bit of body language was repeated seconds later by Isaac. I also noticed that Isaac never seemed to have conversation topics of his own, but rather waited for someone to bring something up. His interests seemed to perfectly match who he was speaking to, and when he told stories, they were just slight variations of a story someone had just told. He also seemed to be getting closer to Luke as the days passed, and it was starting to seem like a borderline obsession. Whenever I dropped by Luke's apartment, Isaac would be there too. He got a job at the same office Luke was working at. He started dressing almost identically. He joined the gym Luke was a member at. They started working out together. They were becoming inseparable. While everyone else seemed oblivious to everything, it bothered me. And it also bothered me when it dawned on me that we really knew nothing about Isaac. Aside from his name and the fact he met Luke at the laundromat, he had never revealed anything more about himself. I was determined to find out more. The memory of that unsettling frown almost dissuaded me, but I pushed it to the back of my mind and asked him to get together for lunch one-on-one. We met at a small diner. It's this really cool local place that has the best burgers you can imagine, and all the waitresses are old women with names like Doris, who call you Hun. Anyway, we grabbed a booth in the back near a window after ordering, and just started making small talk while we waited. Isaac seemed in good spirits, but I noticed right away that he was imitating me as we spoke, and following whatever direction I took the conversation in. Once our food was brought out, I decided to get to what I really wanted to know. I asked Isaac where he was from. He started to tell me the story of how he and Luke had met in the laundromat, but I stopped him. I was frustrated. I already knew that story, and in my frustration, I went overboard. I wanted to know where he was from before that. Where was he living? Where did he grow up? Has he been in this town long? Why did he seem to have no connections with anyone before he met Luke? Did he have family somewhere? Did he have any interests of his own that weren't just following along with whoever was in front of him? I bombarded him with questions, and I kept asking without giving him any time to answer, until he reached out and placed a hand on my forearm. At first, I thought he was stopping me to calm me down and to have a chance to address some of the questions I had been relentlessly throwing at him. That thought was quickly squashed as I looked to see Isaac making the same eerie frown he'd made during the movie night when I had joked about him mimicking Luke. Only somehow, the frown seemed even more impossibly large, and his stare felt as though he was seeing right through me, into my soul. The grip on my arm tightened just across the line between firm and painful, and all Isaac said before leaving me speechless and scared shitless in that booth was one thing: too curious. If Luke and Isaac seemed inseparable before, it was as if they were Siamese twins or something. Isaac started living at Luke's place, and you couldn't go anywhere that one was without the other being there too. They seemed like the same person. The only way you could really even tell them apart was Luke's bright blonde hair and their faces. I wanted to talk to Luke on his own, let him know how uneasy all of this was making me. Maybe I could talk some sense into him, or at least find out more about Isaac to ease my own mind. At one of our monthly movie nights, I finally had the opportunity. I went to grab another beer from the refrigerator and noticed Luke standing at the kitchen sink. His back was to me, but there's no mistaking that bright blonde hair for any of the rest of us. Considering how hard it was to ever get Luke alone anymore, I thought it was as good as a time as any to express my concerns. I tried to bring it up as casually as possible, so I spoke as I opened the refrigerator and fumbled around drawers looking for the bottle opener. He listened patiently as I told him how bizarre I thought it was that Isaac seemed to have modeled his entire life at present around Luke, and pointed out how little we know about his life before that. Finally, I found the bottle opener. I had the opener on the bottle cap as I started to tell him about the incident I'd had with Isaac at the diner. The beer in my hand dropped and shattered against the tile, and I stopped mid-sentence when I finally looked up towards Luke. Reflected in the window in front of the kitchen sink, staring straight at me, was Isaac's deep, unnerving frown. The others came rushing in, at the sound of shattering glass led somehow by Luke. They were asking what the fuck happened, but I couldn't speak. How could I have mistaken some guy we'd only known almost a year for one of my childhood best friends? Isaac turned around, and I swear, his face was almost identical to Luke's now. It was as if a computer was rendering a duplicate of Luke's face and just needed a few more tweaks to be perfect. It was Luke's face, only not. How is nobody else seeing this? And how could I get the rest of them to understand? Isaac laughed, and that incomplete smile crossed his face as he gestured over to me and just told the guys, "Clumsy." Back in the living room, I whispered to the other guys, asking them if they thought Isaac's appearance had changed, noting that I thought they looked so similar and difficult to tell apart now. All three of them told me I was some variation of insane or stupid, and said that Isaac looked the same as he always did. The two of them looked nothing alike. To prove I wasn't making things up, I thought I'd look up the photos from the first night we were out at the bar together. Isaac was in a lot of photos with us. We'd taken a group photo before the night ended. If I could show them how different he looked in these photos, maybe they'd see what I see. I was wrong. When I opened those photos, there was Luke, and standing right next to him was Isaac, looking almost identical. Somehow, the photos were wrong. Somehow I was seeing something the guys weren't, and I had no way to get them to believe me. That night, I had trouble sleeping again. I was too restless and disturbed. Unfortunately, I only became more disturbed as the night went on. At some point, in the middle of the night, I woke up again with that eerie feeling that something unnatural was in the room. Only this time, I made myself open my eyes, and I saw Isaac. He was standing in front of Luke. He was sleeping on the other couch, just staring at him, not moving. I watched in silence because I was too afraid to make a sound, and let on that I was watching. Somehow, it didn't matter. After about 10 seconds, Isaac very slowly started to turn his head behind him towards me. As his face came closer into view, I could see that frown I'd grown to fear. I'd like to say I was brave and looked him in the eye and asked him what he was doing, but that would be a lie. The truth is that just before his eyes would have met mine, I shut my eyes as tight as I possibly could and didn't open them again until well after the sun had risen and everyone else was awake. We didn't hear from Luke for over a week after that. Nobody ever answered the door at his apartment, and the lights were always off, and he wasn't answering his phone. It wasn't uncommon for Luke to take off on an adventure spontaneously now and then, so the other guys chalked it up to another one of Luke's impulsive trips. However, I wasn't so sure. It struck me as odd that we also hadn't heard from Isaac for the same amount of time, so I continued calling and texting the two of them every day, asking where they were and why they weren't talking to us. After about 10 days, I got a text from Luke at 2 a.m. that just said, "Help," with a frown text face. Obviously, I immediately got in my car and drove over with shivers down my spine the whole way there. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but I was preparing myself for the worst. I thought maybe Isaac had finally done something. I was not prepared for what I was about to see. The front door of the apartment was cracked when I got there, so I went right in, and a strong, foul scent invaded my nostrils. Covering my nose with my shirt, I followed what sounded like either crying or laughter, and the smell got worse as I reached the bedroom. When I walked in, he was kneeling at the end of the bed, weeping. When I asked what was wrong, he just pointed at the bed, and that's when I saw it. I gasped. There was Isaac. Plain old Isaac. The one I remembered from that day at the bar. Brown hair, brown eyes, generic male face. Only now he wasn't breathing, because he had cut his wrists. The cuts were deep, and the blood loss had to have been rapid. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I was simultaneously disgusted and relieved to see Isaac's corpse lying there, with the life drained out of it. Luke was clearly traumatized, and once I got my wits about me again, I was able to persuade him to come sit out in the living room while I called emergency services to come collect the body. It was ruled a clear suicide. Luke claimed he'd taken an impromptu trip to visit his mother a few hours away, and he had accidentally left his phone at home on his nightstand, so he didn't get my messages until he got back and found Isaac. His mom verified his alibi, and the autopsy showed he'd been dead for over a week. I asked why he hadn't brought Isaac with him since they seemed to go everywhere together, but he just gave me a sort of vague answer about a disagreement and said he didn't want to talk about it. I didn't push it. He blamed himself for what happened, and I was truthfully just thankful to have my friend back. The funeral was today. Honestly, I didn't even want to go, but I also didn't want to explain to the guys everything that I had experienced in the last year with Isaac, so I sucked it up and went. Something definitely died in Luke's bed that night, and we put something in the ground this afternoon. I asked Luke how he was holding up, and he seemed to be in better spirits. We spoke for a while after the procession, and after the other guys had left. We've got plans to grab coffee at the diner next week. When we finally parted ways, and he told me goodbye, he reached out to touch my forearm and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.